Hello and welcome to my record room in sunny Los Angeles. Today, more gems from the EMI-COLUMBIA-HMV catalogue, a superb catalogue full of legendary artists. As I've mentioned in my earlier video, it's slightly different house sound to that of Decca, though no less wonderful to listen to. They tended to place their microphones a little bit further away from the orchestra, from the performers, so you have a somewhat more of a mid-hall perspective than Decca. But I really love these records, and I'll tell you that many of these early recordings, early pressings, they fetch sky-high prices. I'm very lucky that a number of these early ones I got years ago before the prices really went crazy. And also growing up in England, I bought many of these records as they came out, the ones in the 70s onwards. And these are actually really terrific records. They sound very good indeed. Now I'm going to begin with probably my favorite violinist and one of two records that I have of his early pressings, which are amongst my most prized possessions in my record collection. And that is Nathan Milstein. One of the greatest violinists of the 20th century, a Russian virtuoso of the highest order, and he played with everyone. He was actually friends with Hurwitz when he first came to the States. He lived with Hurwitz for several years. They played together extensively. This record of Mozart violin concertos is absolutely glorious. It's like he and the orchestra are in the room. This is an early pressing that I have. It's a Columbia. This usually indicates a second pressing. The earlier pressings are of a silver blue label, but it's still an all-tube mastered record. These are not in any way modern performances of Mozart in that they take account of everything we now know about period performance, etc., etc. But they are intensely musical. They're not heavy. They go at a nice tempo, and his playing is simply glorious. I would say if you love violin playing and haven't discovered him, he is someone you need to discover. There is actually a beautiful record put out by Analog Productions, Acoustic Sounds, a reissue of an early Capitol record of his. It's a mixed violin recital. There are also various records being reissued by Testament. It's quite easy to investigate his recordings without paying the big bucks. This, along with my recording of him doing the Beethoven Violin Concerto, I mean, this is what I put on when I want to show off my system, when I want to show someone how great records can sound. Wonderful stuff. Moving on, one of the great conductors who recorded extensively for EMI. Now, most people associate him with English music, Vaughan Williams, Elgar, etc. But Adrian Boult also put out a series of records of Wagner's orchestral music with the London Philharmonic Orchestra. And these are just wonderful. The London Philharmonic is perfectly suited to Wagner. It's an orchestra with a rich sound. When I think of comparing it to other orchestras, if you compare it to the under London orchestras, and remember there are 5 major symphony orchestras in London alone, if you compare the London Phil to those orchestras, it's kind of like comparing the Vienna Philharmonic to the other European orchestras like the Berlin Philharmonic. The Vienna Philharmonic has this very mellow, rich sound. It comes from the strings, the brass and winds in particular, and the London Phil has that same sound, and it's perfect for Wagner. It's mainstream Wagner performance, but done beautifully. But what's great is you get some slightly unusual pieces. So here, for example, we've got, the overture to the Flying Dutchman, the entrance of the gods into Valhalla, etc. But then we've got the overture to Rienzi, his early opera, and also a Faust overture. So this is just one of, I think it is 4 records in this set. You can buy them in different forms. But if you want to explore a slightly different version of Wagner and you like the sound, I can highly recommend this. Boult really shows his chops in terms of that he could conduct anything and conduct it really well, and that he was steeped in the 19th century orchestral tradition as it flowed over into the 20th century. Highly recommended. Now, this next record harkens back to Mozart, but done in a modern period instrument performance. And these are the Mozart flute concertos, performed on transverse flute by John Solom. And you can see the transverse flute as illustrated here on the cover. It looks very different from the modern flute, which is completely metallic. The effect is that when you hear this flute, it's a woodier sound, it's a more mellow sound. I absolutely love it. This was a record I just happened upon in one of my local stores, a record surplus down in Santa Monica here in Los Angeles. And I was not familiar with this recording at all, but I did notice that the leader of the orchestra was John Holloway. Now, John Holloway is an exceptionally fine Baroque violinist, and actually I used to go to a early music summer school in Bath when I was growing up, and he was one of the people who ran the festival, along with my gamba teacher, Peter Vell. And he was a wonderful musician, and you can look up some of his recordings. In particular, he's done these fantastic recordings on, I think it's ECM, of the Bieber violin sonatas, which are quite unique pieces. Anyway, seeing his name on this, I thought, oh, I'm going to investigate this. And it's a lovely, lovely performance. I much prefer the sound of the Baroque flute to the modern flute, at least in this kind of music. And you've got, it's a nice fold out sleeve, and you actually get to see a photo of him playing and some of the other musicians, and some really good notes here. Whoops, you can see this. And on the back here, you've got some pictures of the various instruments used in the orchestra, period instruments. Really fun. I'm sure you could find this pretty easily online. It won't cost you very much. It's nicely recorded, a really excellent way to experience the Mozart flute concertos differently to how you're used to. And now to another piece of standard repertoire, something we've been used to hearing all our lives. Saint-Saëns, the Carnival of the Animals. This is just such a delightful piece, and it's been done in so many different ways. It can easily stand up to yet another version. What I love about this is a French recording on EMI's French imprint. And in actual fact, I've got quite a few of these EMI French releases and some of the German ones. They're beautifully presented. You see, they're presented in very thick cardboard, and they usually have a fold out like this. And the pressings are very good. This is what they look like. You know, you still got the dog, the nipper in the box, but it's a different kind of label. And I find that often with these country of origin, so for example, a recording that's made in France with a French orchestra, or in Germany with a German orchestra, these pressings, like so the French ones for the French orchestras, German ones for the German orchestras, often sound better than the regular EMI English pressings. It's not a huge difference, but it can do. I just love this performance. It's with two very interesting pianists, Aldo Ciccolini, who you may be familiar with his many recordings of Satie's piano music, also released on French EMI, and Alexis Weissenberg, I think an underrated pianist. He got somewhat tarred in a way because he recorded extensively with Karajan, and people thought of him as a kind of an empty virtuoso. Well, I don't think so. I've got a number of his records and I really love them. And they are both terrific on this. And then you've got this rather unusual piece, which I didn't know at all. It's another piece about animals by Francis Poulenc. And you've got the great Georges Prêtre, one of the great French conductors of the period. He's at the helm of this recording. Really fun. Get something I just found for a couple of bucks in the used bins, and I love it. I love the recording itself and then the performance. Now here's something a little unusual. A favorite piece of mine that I discovered when I was a teenager. I had a cassette of it which I played to death. And this is the Carmen Ballet by Rodion Shchedrin. He's a younger Russian composer, younger than Shostakovich, and he wrote a whole range of music, but this is the work he's best known for. So what he did was he took the famous music by Bizet from his opera Carmen, and also some music from the La Sienne, music for a theatre production, and he rearranged it for percussion and strings, and telling the story of Carmen, but just as a ballet. And this is just such a fun piece. I mean, who doesn't love Carmen? I love that opera, but I also love this piece. And it's a great way to get all those wonderful themes from the opera in a quick one record space. And the orchestration is so inventive. Now, this was the recording which really introduced the piece to the West, and it's done by the Bolshoi Theatre Orchestra and the great Gennady Rozhdestvensky. Always had trouble saying that name. But this is something of an audiophile classic, and this version of a record was issued by Alto. You can see that down here. Alto was one of those reissue companies. They weren't around for a long time, but they did some really nice reissues of the EMI catalogue, Shostakovich, English string music, a whole range of things. They no longer exist. I don't know how hard it would be for you to find this particular version. I would imagine that a good English pressing of the 70s would also sound very good indeed. But this is just too much fun. If you want to explore a more modern recording, there is an excellent recording on Deutsche Grammophon where you've got Mikhail Pletnev conducting. It's actually a very good recording too, per se. Lovely performance. So that's also an alternative if you can't find this readily on vinyl. Okay, I'm going to finish with two sonic blockbusters. The first of which is The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky, and this recording behind me you can see by Riccardo Muti and the Philadelphia Orchestra. That's my original copy, the original EMI pressing, and then there is this mobile fidelity pressing, and wow, this is just incredible. Now, this has long been probably my favorite recording of The Rite of Spring. I remember when the original record came out, people went crazy over the sound of it. It's got such impact. It's a late analog era recording, so it still has that analog warmth, but it captures the attack of Muti's performance. Other performances of the Rite which I love are, I would say, also the Schulte performance on Decca with Chicago Symphony Orchestra, I think it is. I also really like the Michael Tilson Thomas version on Deutsche Grammophon, which has also been released on a SACD by Pentatone. Well worth acquiring. Of the classic older performances, I'd like very much, it's been reissued, both of his recordings have been reissued on Testament on CD, the recordings by Igor Markovich. And I also have quite a fondness for Dorati's performance on Mercury. But if I have to pick just one, this is it. It is just such a stunning performance, a stunning recording, and yes, with the mobile fidelity, it really is worth the money to get hold of this. The trouble with the original EMI recording, at least my copy, is the vinyl is a little bit poppy and ticky even after lots of cleanings. The balance of it is very good, but there is just a little bit of vinyl noise. You know, it's from the era as late analog, and sometimes the actual quality of the vinyl in those pressings wasn't as good. Here it's dead quiet and you've got superb mastering, and what can I say? This is a keeper. And finally, one of my absolutely favorite records in my collection. I have so many recordings on EMI by Andre Previn, most of them with London Symphony Orchestra, but he recorded with other orchestras too. They're all superb recordings, many of them supervised by the legendary team of Christopher Parker and Christopher Bishop. But this is one of my favorites. I got this when it came out, and it's been one of my favorites ever since. And this is music of Benjamin Britten, the 4 sea interludes and Passacaglia from his opera Peter Grimes, and then the devastatingly powerful Sinfonia da Requiem. This recording is so great, what can I say? I'm sort of surprised that it's never been tackled by any of the reissue companies, but maybe because these original pressings sound excellent. As you can see, it's just a regular postage stamp EMI pressings But these EMI pressings from the 70s are very, very good, and often better than some of the earlier pressings. In fact, with many of the earlier recordings, you're okay getting a later reissue. But this is spectacular. If you don't know Peter Grimes, it's one of the key operas of the 20th century, and it certainly was the work that really broke Britain into the big time. And it's an opera that's still performed everywhere, all over the world. The 4 scene interludes describe 4 different times of day. The action of the opera takes place in a seaside community near where Britten himself went to live later in life, Aldborough. He grew up in that area. It's a very stark kind of landscape. I have spent time up there. It's the cold ocean, the cold North Sea, pebble beaches. But the first time I was in Aldborough, I happened to be at the festival. I was there as a Hess student for a week. We got to go for 2 weeks. We got to go to all the concerts free of charge, and as a sort of repayment, we had to help out running the festival. And on our last night, we had this great party at a house near the beach, and went through the night. And I remember coming out at dawn and sitting on the beach with my friends. And as the dawn came out and the ocean came in, I literally heard the music that is in the opening sea prelude here. It comes near the beginning of the opera, and it describes sunrise and the ocean just lapping in on the shore. And as I sat there in the real place and heard the real ocean, I heard this music. It's really an extraordinary piece of pictorial orchestral writing. You've also got a stunning representation of a violent storm. This recording has never been bettered. I actually prefer it to Britten's own. They've extracted Britten's performances of these pieces from his recording of a complete opera and put it together on a record. You can sometimes still find copies of the reissue of that on Org Music, 45 RPM, Bernie Grumman mastered, which sounds great, but there's real magic in these performances in the recording. Then on the other side, you have a Sinfonia da Requiem, which is an orchestral representation of the Requiem. And it starts off with a Lacrimosa, a lament, and then it goes into the Dies era, which is a musical vision of the Day of Judgment, when everyone goes to hell, basically. And then it finishes up with this a gorgeous Requiem Aeternam. I mean, in many ways, this is the dry run for what he would eventually write later, the War Requiem. I mean, he was a pacifist, a conscientious objector. He felt very strongly against war. The work actually has a very interesting origin. It was one of a group of works which were submitted to the Japanese as a commission, and Britten's work was selected and he composed it and handed it in. And then the Japanese, this was in the 30s, the Japanese rejected the piece because they objected to the Christian overtones. And then, of course, you had the attack on America, Pearl Harbor, and everything changed. It was Britten's first large-scale orchestral work, and already he's showing his complete mastery of the orchestra. Anyway, here we have Andre Previn conducting Britten. I don't know how hard it would be to find a good clean copy of this, but it's worth seeking out. I guarantee you will find it's one of the best sounding records in your collection. And with that, that's my selection for today. I will be joining you again soon. In the meantime, very happy to receive your comments. I love reading them. Do subscribe if you're a regular watcher of my videos. Until next time, happy listening.